So I'm glad to be here. Thank you for having me. I wanted to get off the stage because I sometimes, as a special agent, I think about that miscongeniality thing, and the likelihood of me falling is very high. So I thought I'd get down here to safer ground. It is an honor to be here. I am the Director of Safe Schools for the state of Colorado. This is my 25th year in law enforcement. I talked to a few people out there. I came from a local law enforcement agency. I was a 10-year team leader for hostage negotiation. Part of my career really involved workplace violence. So when we talk about school safety, I hope to give you guys just a really quick overview of where we've been in school safety so that you know the facts, you know the research, you know the response, you know some of the lessons learned. And really you can draw from that as your leaders, as you are all leaders out there, the opportunity exists to do something very meaningful for the future of our communities and our schools. So what we'll talk about a little bit and go through this is what we did after Columbine, and I'll tell you that this looks like a vendor. This was what we became a solution because we knew we had to brand it. We needed to send a message to young people that they would remember, sort of like 911. Prior to my law enforcement career, I worked 911, and I will tell you that throughout the last 25 years since we brought enhanced 911 about, what we have really done with our citizens and our community and our young people is we've really created an environment on when you don't call 911. And I think we saw it even with the women that were found that had been held hostage in that home, and you heard that 911 call, and you heard other people say, well, I had seen this woman crawling around the yard naked with something around her neck. And when she told her mother 3 hours later, her mom really debated, is this a 911 call? It's kind of old information. And they didn't make the report. And I do think that part of what we have to address in this country is the fact that there is a culture and climate that exists of minding one's own business, of failure to get involved, of worrying about retaliation to your own family, of wondering how you can be protected. And that is no surprise that that also occurs with children. So as we go, what we ended up coming up with this is Safe to Tell. And our goal was safe communities and safer schools. Engaging the key stakeholders and empowering young people to be part of the solution of school and community safety. Now, in law enforcement, we prevent things often. Not always does the public know about them, whether it's a Homeland Security event, an act of terrorism, something that we intervene, and it's because we've received intel that led us to an investigation so that we could prevent it. We did that at the Salt Lake City and the Olympic Games. We've done it over the course of this country. And the one thing we do in law enforcement is we have critical law enforcement debriefings. Since 1999, the state of Colorado has sent me to many of those law enforcement debriefings around the country, whether it was Pennsylvania Amish. I mean, all of the tragedies that we could get to talk about what could be done better, how our response can be different, how can we grow this. So very practical on our end. The other part that we combine Safe to Tell and the Safe Community, Safe Schools initiative with is the Center for the Study and Prevention of Violence. What we wanted to do is make sure that we were paying attention to what the research showed us worked. As a police officer, as a person standing before you, I can tell you that I have been part during my career of many things that research showed were less than effective. I think that's important to know. What is our investment? Will this be effective, and will we have short-term and long-term results? All right, Columbine. Columbine did change a lot of things. It was not the first incident in history, however. I mean, many of us can go back. We don't have a lot of time today, so I'm going forward. But it did change a lot of things, from the way police respond, from the facts of active gunmen, and that's changing rapidly. Even now, we're talking about how we shoot through glass, what we learned in Connecticut, what does 3M window film do for us, how do we increase time barrier. But Columbine also taught us things. That how we address it in the media. Who do you think of when you think of Columbine? Name a victim. Name a perpetrator. What's easier? Part of what we did is we gave way too much attention with the media to the perpetrators of this act. And what we've seen since then is a continual effort, but those that have perpetrated violence, where they have accessed in their psychological investigation, where we can see that they've accessed those websites about Columbine, about how to kill more, about that ideology of what happened there. So it is an important thing that we have to look at in all of these investigations. We all become part of a club here that no one asked to belong to. And so I would just say that it was very emotional. I've spent a lot of time at the White House just since Sandy Hook. Natalie, the teacher that was shot 4 times, Christina, who was shot 4 times at Virginia Tech. These are the people that you tend to form a bond with. All right, so when we look at it, the one thing we've learned, and this is from my public information background, is we really want to focus on our victims. We want to be careful to glorify the perpetrators of violence. But we also know that it's important how we do that. And when we looked at is the research, and this is where I want to get to this. When we went back with the Secret Service, by the way, the Secret Service, they're really cool. I just want you to know that. FBI, Quantico, I've had the opportunity to shoot my own brother at Quantico. It was a rubber bullet. He shot me back. But it was, training at Quantico, rappelling out of helicopters and doing that. But the Secret Service, one of their biggest objectives in their career is protection, right? Protection and prevention. And so when they looked in the history of school violence, they went back to 1974 up to the year 2000. And that study could show that 81% of the time, in every incident that they studied, 81% of the time, they could identify the person that knew it was going to happen and failed to report it. And when you ask me that question, can it be prevented? I will tell you that that's a big concern to me. 81% of the time. More interesting than that is it didn't stop there, and I don't have the next slide, but when we look at it, 59% of the time, it was 2 or more that knew, that could be identified. And they actually filmed them on camera, asking them certain questions as to why they didn't report it. So that is critical information to say, how do we take down the barriers of allowing access by young people to report? Another interesting part is 7% of the time, it was an adult that knew and didn't do anything. 93% of the time, however, it was another young person, a peer of the perpetrator, that had that information and did not come forward. What did we learn with Columbine? Is that we had pieces of the puzzle. The school district had pieces. Law enforcement had responded to the premises. That information was not shared. HIPAA, FERPA, things that we don't want to share when it comes to mental health issues. As a hostage negotiator, 30 years ago, they would say a suicidal person was not a danger to others. During my career, I do not believe that. I do believe that if we have somebody with suicidal ideations, we have a responsibility to be checking in with that person regularly and making sure that we're assessing how they're doing and if they're doing okay. And do you think that people, that the adults in their lives should have that knowledge when they're monitoring that person? Should that be part of the threat assessment? Well, our answer in Colorado is we changed the information sharing laws. FERPA and HIPAA now, we work with them. They've actually changed some of that information sharing too. That information, the next lawsuit post-Columbine, will not be because we shared information, it will be because we did not. And I guarantee that. That's when we look at those things. Was the information shared? Boston Marathon, the Bureau, FBI, was it shared with the local jurisdictions? Was that intel that they needed to have? The other part that we knew out of that Secret Service study is that when they interviewed all of those people that knew and didn't tell, these were the components with the Department of Ed of the Safe School Initiative. And the number one thing is that we should ensure a culture and climate in a school where young people feel comfortable sharing information. I don't think it's any outstanding research thing that our safest schools are also our highest achieving schools. So we have to have a deliberate effort into making schools safe. And we have to show not only an investment financially, but an investment in time. Are we training our staff? Are we going through the policy of all staff should be trained in response strategies, in drills, in what the procedures are, in recognition of kids with a substance abuse problem, in recognizing bullying? Should they know what is the intervention? Can they answer those questions in an assessment when I come in and say, what's your code for lockdown? When you recognize or you hear a threat, what's the procedure? What happens? What does your policy say? Policy and procedures are critical, and they're usually very dated. I think that's part of the problem with saying these best practices are available, but we need to do a better job of making sure everyone knows what's available. The other part that we knew, and this is what teachers told us. My dad was a deputy chief, my uncle a homicide detective that did some of those major horrific homicides of children. And what did we hear from the teachers when we had kids going up on trial as adults? I could have told you that kid, I'm his third grade teacher. They recognize the behavioral concerns early on. And so I think that that was one of the things that we're all, when we get into this, we go, okay, the behavioral concerns, before the attack happened, there's precipitation of those behavioral concerns. We knew that they occurred, but did we pay enough attention? And what was the intervention? And do we train people in best practices? And who does that burden fall on? Who does that burden fall on? Is there a threat assessment team? Is there a team that's a multidisciplined? Here's just a little information of what we do know of a school shooter. There is no consistent profile. We all want to know the profile, but it can be the 53-year-old drifter that goes into Platte Canyon. It can be the guy that's delivering that goes into the Pennsylvania Amish school. We can have an internal threat from a student within. It can be related to somebody your teacher's dating. It's workplace violence, but it can happen. Here's what we do know, is that if someone's going to do an attack on a school, they are going to make plans. This is not somebody that just snaps. They are going to have plans, and they are going to talk about them. And they may do it in a threatening way. They may say, well, I'm going to show them. They're going to know. It may be a subtle threat, but the recognition for us to talk about our citizens and our young people about not ignoring a threat when someone makes it. Here, you can have my guitar. I've had it since I was 2, but I'm not going to be needing it anymore. You know, giving away personal possessions, those kind of things. We talk about that with young people. We also know that there will be a suicidal component to them. We also can look back at a history of bullying. We can sometimes see that they were the bullies and sometimes that they were bullied. And that's something we learned in Columbine, that we had some very bullying behavior, hazing type behavior of those 2 perpetrators, some suicidal ideation, very significant plans even on video and English essays to the English professor that went straight to the administrator and ended there. That should always go by policy to a team that includes law enforcement. Law enforcement responding to the premises of these activities should be sharing that information with the school and working with them, who knows those kids best. So you're kind of going through this with me. One of the things that we wanted to implement in our prevention initiative is, yes, target hardening is important, right? We want to make sure that people realize they have to check in at the office. And so that if someone's floating around our school, hey, we're going to get them for trespassing. There's no question. Every sign points that you need to check in, buddy. What are you doing back here by the bathrooms? Not okay. But it is a good question. Do we make a fortress? You know, I have schools, and I was in Connecticut since then, helping some schools with some future plans. And what they say is, well, wait a minute, should we cancel all evening activities, like kids to come in and play basketball or volleyball, or all of the things that they want to do banned because we can't provide enough security? Or, oh my gosh, I was just at another thing where the parent teacher said, hey, we were there for parent night. There was like 500 parents there. And people propped the back door open because it was hot. You know, here's where we go. What is the balance? Do we take away the fact that these are places for the community to gather? And can we create a fortress? Can even the Naval Yard? Can things happen at Focus on the Family, New Life Church, the Aurora Theater? The thing is what are our chances of preventing these things? We can increase the time barrier. There are some standard things we can do. Keeping our doors locked during school, making sure that the locks work, making sure that the environmental design of the structure is there. When we put in these brand new schools, I've worked with architects and have put on things called Building Safer Schools for Tomorrow at the Broadmoor. Broadmoor is a big draw, so the architects come. They're great to work with, by the way. But when they love a lot of glass, well, that doesn't provide a lot of time barrier for someone to get in. But there are things we can do to the glass, 3M window fill, different things. So we look at that, policy and procedures. Do they say that if we're working a threat, this is the policy? You have to gather your team. The team has to know. That team includes a member of your local law enforcement. Because if your team is working a threat assessment and you don't have local law enforcement and you're just doing based on the way the child's responding at school, that law enforcement officer can say, hey, we've responded to the house 3 times. Oh, one was a fire in the backyard and the cat was killed. Dad was EPO'd out of the house, and mom's serving in Afghanistan. Does it change your perspective of the threat assessment? So we look at that. Situational awareness, this is something that most people don't have. And I would say this with all of you, talking to legislators, it's important that you have this, because this is what can save lives. This is when we teach women, you don't walk to your car, young girls going to college, And I do it, so I'm the worst one. On your cell phone, texting, how many of you do this? Checking emails while you're walking to your car? You have just become an easy victim, an easy target. But situational awareness, knowing what's going down, do we lock down in a room? Or do we create an option for our staff to say the shooting's happened and beyond that door? Here's an exit. Do I sit here and wait, or do I try to evacuate? What are the options? Run, hide, fight. Many of you have seen that video, probably. If not, look it up. Barriers to reporting, why people don't speak up. Why do people not tell it? What is the infrastructure in the United States to report? Do jurisdictional boundaries even make sense? When you're traveling from one jurisdiction to the next and you see something suspicious, that's not a 911 call, right? A kid cutting themselves, what is it? What's the phone number? Do you take the time to look up the phone number? How easy is it? Is there a system? When we say people have a right to report bullying, what's your system? Do we really want to listen? Do we want to have a structure to access to get that information and make sure it gets forwarded? Or are we allowing them to leave it in a message? Are we allowing them to put it in a Dropbox? Tell you what, if you have kids gathering over here and fights are happening, put a Dropbox that says anonymous tips, go here, because no one will gather there again. But God forbid somebody put a tip in that Dropbox and says, Joey's suicidal. He's really upset he got a D in French yesterday. And no one get it till Monday, and Sunday his mom found him hanging from a tree. True story. That is a terrible injustice to say we want to listen to you, but we don't give you a way to do it that's really effective. Information sharing has to occur. Multidiscipline team has to happen. When we created Safe to Tell, we included all of these things so that it had to happen in the system. Here's what we focused. Intelligence gathering, number one. That's what our number one opportunity to prevent violence or intervene early is, that we get the information and that we respond as local officials. We can get it on the state level, but we give it to the local jurisdiction for their intervention. This thing, if you get dizzy, it makes me dizzy sometimes. Bystander-centered approach. Most hotlines are about someone providing a way for someone to report, I'm thinking of taking my own life. I was sexually assaulted. A hotline is there for someone to talk through it. We're talking about a reporting system where bystanders can report what they have witnessed. So it's for witness protection. It is for the witness that wants to report but wants to be safe and anonymous in the process. Is there any reason we can't do it? On the FBI Fugitive Task Force, that's what we did in order to find bad guys. We used Crime Stoppers. They gave cash rewards. They solved crimes. This is a nonprofit that supports government in allowing bystanders to report anonymously. And what I would show you is the evidence in a little bit that it works, because this is how it's been used. Scenario-based training is something that I developed, I believe in as a police officer. It helped me in my career. When I want kids or cops to listen to me, I give them true life scenarios that have actually happened, and then we say, what happened? What could have gone different? And my audience says, man, if somebody had said something, those two 16-year-olds in Ohio wouldn't be sentenced to a year as sexual offenders, registered sex offenders, and that girl wouldn't be sexually assaulted. So when you think of these cases, it really is effective. Somebody better time me. Tell me when I got to be cut off. Just okay. Education, here's the goal. Now, this is not the goal like you're thinking, solve crime. This is a goal of saying education and awareness makes sense. We want an investment by schools to say we're going to spend this much time on this much training of our staff. All staff, the transportation, administrative office, they all have a role to play in an emergency, and they will all have a role to play in the recovery. Early intervention and prevention can be measured. Throughout our lifetimes, we've been told prevention cannot be measured. Totally disagree. It can. When we get intel and we follow up, we can track what the outcome was. What about when we get concerning behavior, a kid that's cutting themselves? Wouldn't it be nice to know what the intervention was and that it was handled? Prevention, the last part is what young people told us after Columbine, is that they had told adults, but they didn't do anything, that it was swept under the rug. People want accountability and follow-up. So that means when that intel goes out to your local jurisdiction for their response, they're reporting back what the outcome was. That has been very effective in Colorado. Here's the key components that we put in. Anonymous, by procedure and protocol, what I call the Columbo way. And that means that if that procedure and protocol, if somebody sends us a web tip and he's telling us, hey, I know this because it's my neighbor next door, or I have the locker next to him and I saw the gun. I saw that he has a gun, true story. So he says, You can't even say it's a safe to tell report. That kid knows I saw him with the gun today, and he will know I'm the one that told. Is that legitimate? Now, he's in an inner city school, and it's a school that, one of the very few that has metal detectors, by the way. And so we say, no, I'm going to work with law enforcement. They bring me in. He's hesitant to give us the kid's name. He gives us the kid's name. We promise him. We work with law enforcement and school officials and say, hey, it came through safe to tell. We don't want any announcement of that. It's very surreptitious how we can do this. We work with law enforcement. They do a random locker check that day, knowing who they're going. They got the intel. They know who they're going after, right? During that random locker, they get the kid with the gun. They got him separated. They're interviewing him. But while they continue their locker search, they get 2 more kids with guns. By the way, do you guys really feel like an investment in metal detectors is highly effective? It's something to think about. Our state law passed unanimously every time. We're running legislation again this year. But our law had to incorporate last year. It's pretty much model. I think there's a copy on the back. It includes social media. It includes that the Attorney General's office will take care of any subpoena of records. The nonprofit is the custodian of records and provides the anonymity. So the protocols and procedures are critical because we can't write in there, we know this because it's the kid with the locker next door. Our goal is fostering a climate of respect and trust. That emphasis on culture and climate, yes, we need to do the target hardening and all of the drills and everything else, but we also have to say that kids can sense a fair and equitable enforcement of the rules, consistent all-staff training, that students are engaged in their own safety and understand that there's a willingness to speak up or to say, hey, don't treat him like that. We don't treat kids like that in this school. Bullying ends in 10 seconds, 57% of the time when someone intervenes on behalf of the victim. That's critical. That's what we want, that civic engagement. All right, our team approach, we set up the statewide infrastructure. We did not want to put that burden on the local level. And I also believe that consistency should be nationwide. Because I'll tell you what we all count on is that if in Wyoming or New Mexico, and I don't think anybody's here from those other states, but what your intervention in your state could save lives in mine. Your threat assessment could mean the life or death of my situation. Because there are no jurisdictional boundaries. That there is a team identified at the local level to take reports, they have to enter that into the Safe to Tell system and update it. So that means there's a team, and we require a multidiscipline team. Who's your law enforcement? And then we send it to both that school team and to that communication center. That information that we get, and we get it through a multitude of ways, information is then what goes to law enforcement and schools for them to share the response. That means on a Saturday night when we have a suicidal student, the school, he's getting that tip, but he can feel confident that law enforcement is responding to the scene to check their welfare. But guess what law enforcement may need? When kids give us information that Joey is suicidal and he just left a party on foot, or Joey's at home on Facebook and just said goodbye to everyone, what the school has is this database that says his parents are divorced, here's his mom's address, here's his dad's address. Is that something our reporting party's probably going to have? No. But that's what we need from the schools to say, law enforcement, here are the 2 places you need to check. So it has had incredible results. We share the intervention outcomes. Both of them report back what the outcome was and measured results. We maintain that database of threat assessment teams. That's a big job, but I think we're the only state that has that. Identify concerning behaviors is our goal. Fostering a climate of respect and trust, building relationships. That includes in the classroom, teacher to student. Kids will tell you, kids will tell me in my assessment, I loved elementary school. In middle school, kids were kind of mean, but I still loved my teachers. In high school teachers just don't care. It's interesting when you talk to kids, what is that? And that Flippin from the Flippin group, he does a lot of professional development on building those relationships, capturing kids' hearts in the classroom, providing consistent training, multidisciplinary response, creating policy and procedure. I'm still okay. I'm feeling a little rushed. I'm going to just take a breath. No, you guys are a hard audience to crack here. Here's the other part that we see. This is something I don't want to see again in my career. See this guy right here? White shirt, tie. He's a professor, and I know Christina, when we talk about Christina in the classroom and Madame opens the door because she can hear the shots being fired in the hallway. And she's like, oh my gosh. And they were talking because there were 2 kids murdered on campus that that day, that all the rustle of, they thought maybe it was domestic violence, dating violence, and they're talking about it, and then they start hearing the noises. And she comes back in, and they start barricading the doors. Well, here's where I believe in the environmental design of buildings, that we have to do an assessment of what the building looks like. But their doors were the old style doors, where you would lock your possessions into your office, and you'd have to lock your door with the key to lock it. So how does that work when you've got shooter in the hallway, shots being fired, people going down, and your door will not lock? Is that the place we should ever be again? We should never be there again. That professor there told his class, if it gets bad, break the windows and jump. He went out to the hallway, he locked his kids in, every one of them survived. That should never have to happen again in the history of the United States. Red Lake, Minnesota, they had every single security system in place at that time that I've ever seen. The best surveillance system, 2 metal detectors, 2 guards at the front, operating the metal detectors. And this is where his grandfather was the Indian chief. He shot them, took his body armor, he went into the school, and you could see him go to the lock, and he shoots the lock on the door on the surveillance camera, and the door doesn't go. You know, in law enforcement, we don't shoot the locks. I'm only sharing that little piece of intel because TV shares it with you all the time, and Mythbusters proved it. So, well, we're not going to go that way. He has a little fit because he can't get in, but then there's this little window next to the classroom door, and he shoots out the glass, and he's in, and he starts shooting people in that classroom. As he goes into the second classroom, teachers say, run. When he's shooting, run. In that instance, the people that fled that scene survived. I think that it's important to know what our options are. Sandy Hook, it does change everything. Because today, to this date, what have we done for elementary schools? We didn't include colleges before Virginia Tech, right? It was just Columbine and it was just high school. We forget that the peak of violence is in middle school by research. Onset of sexual activity, first trial of drugs, fighting, bullying. That's when it becomes critical. So our best opportunity to intervene and have influence on kids with education is in middle school. So my thought is, well, then we should train them then and make sure that when they get to high school, they have these kind of tools available. But when we look at somebody seeking out a soft target, and this would be a church, this would be an elementary school, we look at what happened here, and it's alarming to all of us. And I get really exhausted in my career of people thinking it can't happen here. And when you look and you say, when's the last time? I think the hindsight that is so struggling, and that morning I learned by ABC News calls me to tell me about it, to see if I'll go on TV. Well, we've kind of made a commitment out of our office, the Attorney General's office, that I won't do that. I'm there to support other governmentalities to try to help them, because that's kind of our role and our response and what we've done and taking our lessons learned to help others. But when we see this, we think we have to ask, what could we have done better? And I think it's really hard for the people that survive it to say, was there something that I could have done when someone plans it? And here's what I will just tell you as a police officer, is no matter what we do, are we going to allow kids to go to school every day? Are we going to allow them to go home? Because if you're a bad guy, are those 2 opportunities? Which we saw at Deer Creek. He waited till they left that day and began open firing. I'm just saying that when you talk about building a fortress, what we have to say is some of our ways of preventing it is to be focused on the intel, and that someone has been saying that they're going to do it, or express some ideation, or having those mental health concerns, and there's opportunities to intervene. All right, what we know in the United States, there's 2.4 shootings per year in United States schools. Here's some of the facts. Since 2010, there have been 39 school attacks. 2012 was the highest number of school shootings recorded in U.S. history. Empowering youth to be part of the solution, education, scenario, training set, and mindset was our focus. What can we tackle? The thing that we learned through this process is that social media knows no boundaries. Our latest planned school attack is because a student in Colorado is online gaming with another student. And what does he ask? A simple question: will you be on tomorrow night? The kid types back, no, tomorrow night I may not be on. I might be dead. What? What do you mean by that, dude? So you can see the conversation, right? And he says, Well, if you hear about a massacre at my school and that occurs, then you'll know I'll be dead because I'll have killed myself by then. And it goes back and forth. And this kid's like, holy crap. Well, that's a threat, right? This is like what we call a clue. Does that have to be reported? In Colorado, we really focus in our training classroom guided discussions is like bombing an airport. That must be reported. So what this kid does is he makes a safe to tell web report. He copies and pastes that whole dialogue into a web report. And he says, I'm just really concerned that something bad could happen. I don't even know where this kid lives. Send. We get it. State Patrol gets the web report. Boom. It's like opens it up. They're like, Susan, this is what we got. I'm like, is there an IP address? Yes, there's an IP address. I'm like, okay, Fusion Center, our kayak, Colorado Information Analysis Center, Fusion Center, 24/7. Get a search warrant on the IP provider. They immediately get on that. That's how quick it is. Then they do a search warrant to the user. Boom, Biloxi, Mississippi. Biloxi, Mississippi is notified that this user has just said this. What is the narrative that kid sent us? Is that anonymous? No, that's evidence because that's the intel. We send them the intel. They hit that kid's house at 2:30 in the morning, take 7 guns out and all the computers and make an arrest. And he says, I was never going to do it. Now, that's an intervention that's traceable, right? Those are the kind of things the social media 14-year-old girl says, hey, my friend has been dialoguing with someone online. She's been building a relationship. Tonight, she's sneaking out with him at 1:30 in the morning. We've all told her it's too dangerous. You shouldn't do it. You don't really know him. She insists upon doing it. She's 14. Law enforcement goes to the house on this check the welfare on a Friday night. It's a busy night, right? Parents are like, oh my gosh, they confront their daughter with law enforcement. They talk about all of what could happen. There's tears, they cry, they hug. She sleeps with mom. They write thank yous to the 2 police officers of that jurisdiction. 1:45, they hear a noise at their daughter's window. He didn't get the message that it was over. He is trying to get her attention in the window. Dad goes out, ends up pounding him a little, holding him down. Mom calls 911. They're fighting in the yard. He has a criminal history, duct tape in the car, and drugs. Is that an intervention? That is the recognition of an intervention. And our kids today are smart. They can throw that into a tip in 2 seconds. So what we've got to do is we have to say, if we're really going to see something and say something, let's build the infrastructure for people to truly do it. That includes a 2-way dialogue. Our 2-way texting, we can keep open for a couple days. The law protects the anonymity. Am I okay on time? I think I have like a few more minutes. Okay. Steubenville, Ohio. I don't want to leave this out because we can't just talk about school shootings. What do we see day to day? When we see these incidents in the media, a girl's passed out unconscious at a party. Kids are filming it. They're swinging her around. Is there an opportunity here to get her help? If someone is unconscious from alcohol or a date rape drug or something that's been introduced into their system, that is a life-threatening event. And I'm speaking to you like your students, but this is how I talk to kids. Is there an opportunity here? And you think about consequences, right? Kids all think about, I don't want to get in trouble. And a lot of us have Samantha's Law in the books that says, if you call 911 and you remain with the victim, Samantha's Law says you're immune from prosecution and medical services can be provided, right? How many times do we talk about kids about that? We don't. We're not doing a good job on that stuff. So here we go. Instead, it gets to the point where she's sexually assaulted. It's videotaped. 2 boys are being sexual offenses, sexual predators. You've seen the drill. But the reason this depicts is what's happening in America is the media is always on scene. How many of you have a cell phone, can take a video today? Well, you know what? 80% of 4th graders can. So what they're doing is, and I think of what's the complicity issue if you're the person filming the fight with a device you could be reporting to police? How are we setting our policy in schools so that when kids are in the south hallway and they're all standing there watching because they know when Rebecca comes to her locker, Jessica's going to attack her and they're going to see a fight? Well, our complicity issue should support what we do when you're driving the car and your friend goes in to rob the clerk, ends up in a fight, kills the clerk, who gets charged for murder? That complicity theory, that complicity issue is something we should be including. That if you're standing there as a bystander not doing anything or filming it and saying, pull her hair, kick her in the face, then you also are part of the crime. that's occurring. So I know I'm getting a little soapboxy here. Just with sexting victims, here's where we have, this is New Berlin, Wisconsin. This is somebody with a sexting case. Sexting has become an issue that we have to talk to kids about putting out photos of themselves, but also how they can be extorted on the internet once they've sent that photo. And this is a case where more than 39 victims, male victims, all of them boys. I'm not going to go into that. I don't think we have. It is no less courageous for a young person to speak up in a way that keeps them safe. Our goal, and when we talk to kids, is if it's about your safety or the safety of someone else, you really have to get an adult involved. You have to make the report. It doesn't have to be through Safe to Tell, but it has to happen. The other thing is really recognizing that it's not the betrayal to tell when a friend needs help. It's actually the betrayal not to. And here's some of the outcomes. Comprehension, we do you've already heard that, but so we've had 282 planned school attacks reported through web, texting, or phone calls. 282, 31 of them were multifaceted that included recovery of plans, hit lists, weapons, explosives, one of them torturing devices. So you kind of get the idea. 2,126 were regarding bullying interventions that somebody needed to help them. I have every one of these is a different case with a different story. 1,248 suicide interventions of children in Colorado. The youngest one, 9. We've had many 10 or 11 or under the age of 12. Some of them have been cut down. Some of them were completely unconscious from their overdose and transported. 1,307 about substance abuse and the need for an intervention. 300, and these are just some of them. You have an impact report that gives you all of them. 311 weapons taken out of schools and school buses in Colorado. I know I'm making Colorado, I think this is wonderful though. This is reflective of the interventions happening on a daily basis. Dating, domestic violence, 68. Sexual related crimes reported, 462. When we get that coach in the media, we pretty much know it all started with a Safe to Tell tip. It doesn't always get reported that way, but what we know is that's what started the process. We do call, web, or text. I think it's very important for you to know we started out with the phone line. And I will tell you throughout history, immediately following Columbine, we put up a tip line. 4 years later, it was deemed less than effective. I've been to Michigan. I've been to Utah. I go a lot of places that also did the tip line, and they can't show 6 times of use. Colorado couldn't show 7 times of use in 4 years. Michigan, I was just there. Michigan's a big state. What I would tell you is a line by itself is ineffective. It takes a comprehensive, deliberate effort. And I wanted to show you today that how we've surrounded our effort with the reporting tool. So while we have the hub of the ability to report, we have a comprehensive, and it's taken quite a bit of legislation. So majority of reports are through an electronic means. Once we started texting is by far the preferred method for young people, and we only offer that to a segment of the population in a big city that can handle it. All of our reports are answered by State Patrol, and I think I'm to the end here, but I wanted you to, I hope that I gave you a little bit of information and a little bit of food for thought.